Oh, what are we going to?
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Alex Partners. For more than 40 years, we have helped companies and their stakeholders around the world harness opportunity, overcome challenges, and achieve outsized outcomes. Alex Partners, when it really matters.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on AutoLine After Hours. A shout out to Alex Partners for helping make this all possible. Gary, good to see you.
John, how are you?
I'm rocking, man.
Yeah, good.
Last show of the year, baby.
Of the year. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So I got to end this. We got these really smart guys here.
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll let the audience know in a second who they are.
But we could have a quiz with all of you before, because we're going to talk a lot about car companies on this show.
Yes.
And so I'm going to ask you, well, maybe we should introduce them.
Let's introduce them. So we've got Tu Lee from Sino Auto Insights. We've got Glenn Stevens from MichAuto. Great to have the both of you here, by the way. And
glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So
okay. You got to put your thinking caps on.
Yeah,
okay?
let's hear it, Gary.
So
it's so late in the year.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
not a lot left there.
Okay, so on December 18th, 2009, General Motors announced that it was shuttering a company. What company was this?
Oldsmobile?
No.
Saturn.
No. I wish we had one of those clock things that made noises.
Yeah.
Company 2009. Company.
No.
No, because those were all
not a brand.
brands.
A company?
You're saying a
or
company.
A brand?
GMAC. No, they had already sold GMAC.
All right, you're not going to get it.
Okay, we're not going to get it.
Saab.
Oh, poor Saab.
It was sort of interesting. I mean, looking back into their history, so General Motors bought a 50% stake in Saab in '89. Okay, then they got full ownership in 2000, and they only had a run for 9 years owning that company.
I was a two-time Saab owner.
You're a two-time Saab owner?
Yep, 9.3, and the 9.3, the manual.
Yeah,
so.
and
it was a very simple car, and unfortunately, I had it in the Bay Area, so I burned the clutch a few times driving up and down San Francisco streets. But it was nice. It was very, no quality issues, but it was a pretty simple car.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gary, this is a perfect segue, because what you're hearkening back to a time when the Detroit automakers had a global view. You know, Ford had invested, or bought, I should say, Volvo, Jaguar, Land Rover, Aston Martin. Who am I missing? There might have been another in there. GM figured it had to get Saab. They were building up in Europe. And since then, we've seen the Detroit automakers in full retreat, pulling out of markets all around the world, pulling out of market segments that they no longer compete in. And Gary, you've been on this for quite a while. I'm saying it's time for Detroit to stop retreating and start going on the offense.
Well, okay. It's, talking about companies changing, okay. I looked at numbers, and I looked at Ford in the year 2000 and Ford in 2025, okay. And just think about this in terms of models being offered to the market. Back then, it was like 25 models being offered. Now it's down to 15, right? And it's the same thing for General Motors. It's the same thing for Stellantis, formerly known as all those other names, right? And this gets to your point of pulling back, retreating. So,
and to John's point, Ford, they had a cult following for the Focus and Fiesta in Europe. The young kids loved it. And then early years in China, the Fiesta and Focus were doing super well, like the late 2000s, early 2010s. But then they just kind of lost their mojo, stopped investing.
Well, just think about the Crown Victoria, loved by cab drivers, right? I mean, things like that. I mean, gone.
Well, it's markets, it's models, and the competition is very different today. So China, I say China was not an industry not that long ago, and it really wasn't. And today, it's a force that is just literally spreading around the world. So it's kind of the stack up, and then regulation and policy in those different markets made a big impact too, as to what they did with their products. But no question about it, when you look at those footprints and those blueprints, they've changed dramatically.
Right. And Glenn, you hit on an important point here, because China has a strategy. China formulated a strategy 25 years ago of how it was going to dominate the global business. Where's our strategy? What strategy do we have at all as a country, as an industry? I don't see any whatsoever. I see us in full retreat, put up the tariff barrier, hide behind the walls, and hope we get through.
Okay, I dispute this, John, because we have a strategy, and it's right on the table there. That Glenn and his people did.
Michigan has a strategy.
Well, we're
thanks
putting-
to MichAuto.
So talk to us about
Talk about your latest
what you guys
report.
Sure. So we've done this report. We call it the Automobility Report. We've done it since 2013. We do it about every 18 months, and it's pretty much been the same. It's a definitive look at all the different components of our ecosystem: OEM, suppliers, talent, testing, everything we have. Very much unique to the world still. Even with all the global competition, this is a very unique ecosystem. We do lead in a lot of things, particularly in North America. But this year we decided to put two words in front of that automobility: state of. What's the state of it? What are the competitive forces? What are we up against? And what do we need to do about it? So we've called to action some of the points, and really what we're doing over the next 9 months, and Tu's helping us, is we're building a roadmap and a policy strategy for our industry, for Michigan. So we're not on an island and we're not on two peninsulas wondering why the world's passing us by.
Yeah.
See, I mean, when I read the report, it's astonishing to me the depth and breadth of the auto industry in this state still. But I mean, it's certainly under pressure. I mean, and you guys have this stat: 20% of all jobs in Michigan are in the mobility industry, with $83 billion in compensation paid out annually. You know, of the top 100 auto suppliers in North America, 95 of them are in Michigan.
Yes.
I mean, it's stuff like that. I don't think people
There's
really
25 OEMs in Southeast Michigan.
With 25.
There's 25. Yes, there are. They're in the report. So you know the ones, but
GM, Ford, Stellantis,
Hyundai, Nissan,
Toyota,
3 Chinese companies,
right?
and you have 3 new ones relatively. You have Lucid here now, you have Scout here now, and you have Slate. These are OEMs. So when you add them all up, some of them are small, some are mighty and big.
Yeah.
There are 25 different OEMs doing research, development, testing, engineering here in Southeast Michigan.
One thing that I'd like to point out is that, you know, this report talks about tier ones, but I think we're still looking through the lens of what the traditional tier ones are. And we had a panel discussion, and I kind of said we have to have the paradigm shift, because now NVIDIA is a tier one. Now Amazon is a tier one, and they're not going to take what a Bosch and a Vallejo used to take from the OEMs. They're just going to go move on to a different business sector, one that's going to be profitable for them, or at least something that gives them an opportunity to continue to build.
Okay, you said then they're not going to take. Elaborate on that. But I mean, so you're basically saying that the OEM is going to say, okay, we're going to pay you $10 for this, and they're going to say no.
Well, so there was a great article, I think it was a TechCrunch article or a Verge article, about Luminar and how they invested $200 million into capital equipment for the Volvo contract. And Volvo said, we're going to go 100,000 thousand LiDAR to 300,000 LiDAR to 1 million LiDAR. And then they're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And, you know, the 200 million was already committed, and now Luminar's in bankruptcy.
Volvo said that they eliminated it because Luminar couldn't deliver.
Right.
That's Volvo's side of the story.
Right. He said, she said, but the fact of the matter is they committed a lot of capital to that, and the order just never came through. But if you look at now Ford, GM, and Stellantis all writing down, you know, big zeros after a bunch of numbers, do you believe Volvo or do you believe Luminar? It's probably both of their faults, but.
Well, look, you know, with the Ford write down, we need to talk about that, because that fits into this whole thing. Are we going to go on the offense, or are we going to retreat?
So this is the $19.5 billion.
The $19.5 billion that they have to write off in EV assets that are essentially worthless right now. And so why? Because we had a Democrat administration, the Biden administration, that came in and pushed EV regs to the extreme. And now you've had, and the industry heavily invested to be able to meet those. Now you got the Trump administration come in, kicks the leg out from all of those incentives, wipes away the EV mandate, and now says, nope, now internal combustion is the answer, baby, go that way. So now the pendulum's swinging all the way back. And at some point, the Democrats are going to come back into power, swing the pendulum all the way back to where it was before. And I can see a situation in the near future where the automakers are writing off wasted ICE investments. So when I talk about having to go on the offense, it's not just the CEOs of the domestic automakers that have got to say, we got to put a plan together. The country's got to, and
Sure.
we've got to adopt a regulatory mechanism that doesn't swing from one extreme to the other every time we change administrations.
Okay, but what you're not bringing into this discussion is the fact that lots of people bought lots of Teslas without any government grease. They just bought those cars because they were products that had the characteristics that people admired, characteristics that people want, characteristics people were willing to pay money for.
And still do.
And still do.
And
so the question becomes of like, okay, is Ford offering products that people will continue to pay for? Is General Motors offering products that people will continue to pay money for?
I think GM is. I think Cadillac is. I think the Equinox has hit that point.
One important caveat for the Tesla, because a lot of it was originally sold in California. I was just in California 3 weeks ago, $7 a gallon. So that was one of the reasons, because it's
HOV lane stickers was another one.
There's incentives and disincentives to push towards electric vehicles in California specifically. And despite all of that, Tesla is now down in every major market in the world.
Which was predicted, by the way.
Right. But they're still a $1.6, $1.5 trillion company. So.
Yeah.
Well, but back to the consistency. And I do think you're right about the last administration. But we did have a lot of irrational exuberance about what the market could hold. I mean, an incredible amount of capital got deployed. And we haven't talked about it, but we all know that it has flowed down through the tiers. And that's where a lot of the pain is. The capital that can't be deployed, capital that's sitting idle, capital that's, you have to go back to your customer and say, I need relief. And so that's going on. I talked to a CEO last week and I said, what's the situation with tariffs and trade? And he said, you know what the number one problem I have is how much it's damaged my relationships with my customer. Because the friction, these companies are 6% EBITDA businesses. You can't absorb a dime at that point.
So this is the supplier community.
Yeah. But, I think we're in a situation now where with regulation, with right sizing, with focusing on what the consumers want, we're seeing some astronomical shifts. And that's not all companies, though. Toyota's kind of done this through the.
It's been sort of steady as she goes.
Which I think companies need to take the long view, but we need to give them policy that helps them do that. And we do not do that as a country. And frankly, we don't do that well in Michigan either, doing that, the heartbeat of this industry.
John was mentioning the competition from China. I mean, it seems to me from your report that the competition that Michigan has are the southern states, not foreign companies. I mean,
it's both. I mean, if you look at a BYD map, look at it today, look at it next month, where they're at and where they're expanding. That's one company. That's a global footprint. And there's only two countries they're really not in, ours and Canada, and who knows where that will go. But you're right. I mean, to think that three companies have 50% of the market now, Hyundai, Toyota, and GM. I mean, that's so much different than what we were talking about not that long ago.
Right. So how do we?
And they're southern states.
Look, MichAuto has done a terrific job with this mobility study that you've put together. The other thing, Gary, you mentioned how comprehensive it is. It's always consistent. You guys aren't coming out 18 months later and go, whoa, we're not. Your policy suggestions have been very consistent from day one. But how do we enact that? How do we make that happen? There's government policy that's got to take place, but the industry's got to grab the bull by the horns too. A lot has been identified as to what makes the Chinese so competitive. So, for example, common components, not just across vehicle lines within a company, but across the entire industry. We could do the exact same thing. Wouldn't cost much money to do it all. In fact, it would save all kinds of time
You've
and
talked
money.
about this a lot.
I've talked about
You
it a
have,
lot,
and
but
I
I'm
don't-
bringing it up again with this whole thing of let's stop retreating. It's time to go on offense.
Well, you made a comment last week during our panel. We had Elizabeth Creer from Carr, and we had Daniel Howes, and we had April Bear from Stateside moderated. And it was a great conversation. But you made this point to me: the shell of the vehicle, the mechanical part, anybody will be able to do that and can already. But it's the other guts that are going to be the differentiator.
Yeah, we have to be able to walk and chew gum, as private enterprises, but in support of that. And I'm not a politics guy or political guy. I just know that if we were looking at car manufacturing as being commoditized within the next 15 years, how would we create a strategy to build around the next thing? Because we already know we're probably not going to get a lower cost vehicle built in the United States versus a China. So what value add are the legacies here in the United States going to provide that customers want, right? Because, to your point, why can't Ford and GM, begrudgingly handshake and say, let's work on LMR together? We could save $1 billion each, probably, at least $1 billion each, and probably get to market quicker. Because they work together with Toyota, they work together with all these other companies, but both of them have announced that they have LMR technology.
One example, they both collaborated on the 10-speed automatic transmission that's in almost every F-150 and Silverado. When you talk to the engineers at either company, they're both going, that was a great program. That really came together well. And then you ask them, well, what's the follow-up? What are you working on now? Oh, we're not, I think it's like they have the success story and they just let it fritter away.
From our perspective, and this is what we're calling in the report and what we're going to do with the roadmap next year, is we have an inflection point election next year in this state and in the country with the midterms. So if we just focus on our state and all those assets and all those people that are employed and millions of people, it's our economic driver. Yes, ag and travel and tourism are too, but this is our economic driver. And if we don't do things differently, we cannot expect the same result. We kind of, in Michigan, want to force our way through these inflection points, and it doesn't work that way. It's dramatically different now. So we have to wake the politicians up. And we've been doing that. In Lansing, we're going to do more of it. And we have a new governor coming on. So our intent is to hand a report and a blueprint to that next governor when they take transition office next year. That's our plan.
Mm-hmm.
But Glenn, when you survey the landscape in Michigan and you survey the number of factories that we have here, whether it's assembly plants or supplier plants, and is it this mindset of people wanting to continue to do what they've always done, but maybe they'll just do it a little better this time to solve it? Or are they recognizing what it seems to me that you're suggesting is that, you need a step change, that you need to be doing something that is entirely different than has been the case for the last umpteen years?
I think most companies know the step change. For example, the factories. There's going to be so much more automation. We think there's a lot of automation and machine learning and AI in plants right now. We haven't seen anything yet, because that's the only way they're going to be able to compete, and that's the only way they're going to be able to drive cost efficiency. That is going to happen. But you got to have a lot around that. You still have to have business climate policy, and you need to have talent. And I know it sounds like a broken record, but ask anybody, we still don't have enough skilled trades. We don't have skilled trades.
Right. Which is a fault of the education system to a degree. And it's a fault of the automakers too for not having apprentice programs.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good things happening in that area, and we could go down a rabbit hole, and I do all the time, but we do a really poor job with pathways in our schools.
Right. Exactly.
And those states which are doing a better job are the ones that are going to thrive, and that's where you're going to have automated and advanced manufacturing located.
Right. And what I love is that's part of your report too.
It is.
Education's got to get addressed. And that's why when I'm saying it's time to stop retreating and go on offense.
Agreed.
It's a comprehensive approach that we need. It's not just, trying to light a fire under the CEOs. They already got their hands full. They're trying to do stuff, although I do think that they could do more. But yeah, education, key part of it, regulatory environment, investment climate, we need to think about a comprehensive strategy. I don't like to call it an industrial policy. A lot of people get their hackles up when they hear that term.
It's what it is.
That's what I know it's what it is, but I'm using the term
I use the term
strategy.
too, and somebody goes, "Oh, don't call it that." I'm like, "Well,
Yeah.
what do you want me to call it?" But
I
that's
call
what
it
it is.
strategy.
Right.
People don't seem to object against a strategy.
And I guess as politicians and economic development folks, do we lean into the incumbents that are currently here, or do we create outreach? Because if you think about in broad sense, it's the Chinese companies that are actually growing, that are adding people to their companies as opposed to replacing people, which the GMs and Fords are basically doing. And I had to qualify this on the panel because I wasn't sure how it was going to take. You know, my dad, 27 and a half years at GM, my sister, 35, her husband, 30. But as a Michigander who wants people to have jobs, do we invite the Chinese if we feel that inevitably they're going to be building in the United States or North America?
Do we feel that inevitably?
I do. I do, because the 20-year-olds, the 25-year-olds on TikTok see Chinese cars every piece of their feed now, and they know what they're missing. And there's going to be this swell of resentment on that stuff, I think.
Right. But how do you let the Chinese in a way that's fair and equitable, I guess is the term that I would look for? You're up against a state policy.
That is true.
They don't have, look, too, you know this as well as I do. How many Chinese car companies are profitable? 3 or 4?
Right.
That's it. And their profitability is nosediving right now.
Mm-hmm.
You take away the government subsidies in China, that industry collapses overnight. So that's what we're up against.
Sure.
We're up against companies that can take the long term because their government's going to prop them up. So getting back to what Glenn was saying, how do we have investment policies in the United States that encourage a long-term look? Because right now for the investment community, long-term is the end of next year. That's long-term for them. That's a long way. The end of 26, holy moly, that's a long-term away. Whereas the Chinese take a 10 to 20-year look at things. You know, look at simple things that we've given away. You know, lithium-ion batteries, where were they invented? Right here in the United States. When you look at, rare earth magnets, General Motors invented them. What did they do? They sold it to the Chinese for pennies on the dollar because GM could not see an instant return on this stuff. The Chinese saw a long-term benefit, and now they dominate that segment. So how do we put in regulations or laws in this country that reward the long-term look at things, that encourage investors to take the risk to put money into it?
John, I'm going to double down on that because Tesla announced that they're going to incorporate Starlink into their vehicles now.
Mm-hmm.
That was Hughes Satellite with GM in the late 80s. And then OnStar could have been the connected vehicle. And then they had EV1. So all these things, they were ahead of the curve. They just didn't, I think the bean counters were the ones that were like, this isn't immediately profitable, so we're going to can it.
Right.
But some of these companies do have that vision.
I know, but we blame the bean counters. But they're looking at the guidance that the company has given to Wall Street. And that drives the stock price. And you got a board of directors who's telling management, you've got to increase shareholder value, and you got to do it every single quarter. So I'm not saying we're going to rip up the system that we've got, but we can put rules in place that reward long-term investment.
Agreed. And I'm pretty optimistic about the hometown teams right now. I'm a lot more optimistic about Stellantis than I was a year ago.
For sure.
You know, and I don't know if you saw, I mean, to see Auburn Hills Tech Center alive again, to me, is pretty cool, right? Especially with what I do every day.
I hope it's not too late. That's my word.
They're making a go.
Yes, they are.
They're making
They're
a go.
hiring people. They're rebuilding it.
They're going to invest in their product. They're investing in their plants, and they're making a go.
Yep.
They're pushing the chips in. You know, I was at the new Ford headquarters. Got a tour of that a couple of weeks ago.
Very impressive.
Very impressive. I mean, they're packing it in to compete, right? And I don't think you can argue with the General Motors product lineup right now. We're setting the EV pullback aside, but what they all need is consistency, because you're right. The White House changes in a couple of years, and the Democrats come in, and the green agenda just gets jammed down our throat again. That's not going to work. So we can only do so much there, but I do believe as a state and in a region here, with leadership, we can do a lot. we've flip-flopped on our own issues. Look at right to work. That doesn't help the situation with attracting businesses.
Right.
We go back and forth,
right.
back and forth.
Just for the audience. So right to work means you don't have to join a union to have
Not anti-union. You just don't have to
You
join.
don't have to join. Right.
Right. And the states that are growing with the other parts of the industry are all right to work states for the most part.
Right. That's
So,
right.
so do you think that is why? I mean, you have this stat which I think is notable. In 2004, 3.1 million vehicles were built in southern states. In 2024, that rose to 5 million. I mean, Jesus. Whereas in the Midwest, which includes Michigan, the production of new cars plummeted from 7.1 million built in 2004 to 5.2 million last year.
All you have to do is look at a map of the United States and map where non-UAW factories are. They're all in the South.
And they're all growing.
Right. And all of the GM, Ford, Stellantis factories are all based in the Midwest, effectively.
No,
In
look,
this country.
we,
In this
you
country.
you mentioned that we have 95 out of 100 of the top tier suppliers in the world located in Michigan. We don't have one foreign automaker based assembly plant in Michigan. None. And Toyota, going back some years ago, wanted to put a plant in Michigan.
There's been quite a few OEMs that have looked at it over the last.
That's right.
25
Volkswagen was
years.
another one. And they sent out feelers to try to find, where would the UAW stand about them coming. And it was like, you bet we're going to organize you. You bet you're going to take a big three contract. You bet you're going to pay the same thing that the big three pay. And they went, thank you very much. I'm going to go to Indiana and Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia because I don't want to put up with this stuff.
But that is what it is.
It is what it is.
Right?
Right.
So it's, what are we dealing with? What do we have? How do you protect it and retain it? The 13 assembly plants, the 25 OEMs, the 95, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The multiple of companies and small, 10 employees, 75 employees across our communities.
Which is where the real innovation is coming out of.
There is, and that's where there's a lot of employment there, and a lot of investment in communities, and a lot of little league teams get sponsored by those companies. We have to look at, again, back to what we're saying, the forces we're dealing with are very different. And then, we got this thing AI that is just blowing up the world on top of it, right? And so these are what we're dealing with. So what do we do to make our hometown teams, and I do consider Toyota to be a huge corporate citizen here.
They're an excellent corporate
They are a
citizen.
huge part of our ecosystem and our culture and our community here. And so are a lot of the other OEMs. So what do we do to help them? And we have to take a longer view, and that's what.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because, when we say Detroit, everyone thinks GM, Ford, Chrysler historically. Toyota, as you pointed
over
out.
2,000 people in Arbor
It's
Saline.
an excellent, and right down the road here, I mean, literally.
Nissan Tech Center.
Nissan Tech Center is right around the corner here. And then the Hyundai one isn't far away either.
I live in Metro Detroit, and there are great Korean restaurants, they're great Japanese restaurants, and that's because they come over here to take jobs.
Exactly.
So
exactly right.
They should be included.
Right. No, they should be. Yeah, and that, when I talk about time to stop retreating and go on the offense, I want them to be part of that offensive plan.
Well, I'll give you a specific. Last year, we worked on an R&D tax credit for the state. We didn't have one. We were one of only a handful of states. We have one now, but there's waffling on funding that now. It doesn't make sense.
Lack of consistency.
But I'm going to throw this out there. There's this fundamental, let's say, push against innovation, because innovation in Silicon Valley starts with two people and a computer, or two computers, or three computers. And so we have to also consider what the next generation of innovative companies is going to be, make it attractive for them. Why isn't Uber here? Waymo is probably going to be the best thing that happened to competition in the big three, although they're probably grudging about welcoming them to Detroit. I actually think it's going to be an amazing thing because we get to experience it firsthand in Detroit, and then we know what else is going on in the rest of the world because Waymo's now in Detroit. And I think more companies like that need to be attracted.
But explain what you mean, why this will be affecting the big three, that Waymo's here.
Well, because first of all, we only really talk about automotive. And to me, automotive is now a slice of what transportation and mobility is. And Detroit and Michigan want to be this global epicenter for mobility. That's a tagline or a term that they've coined. And to me, mobility is, my son wanting an e-scooter and being able to ride an e-scooter to school instead of me getting in my car and driving him 3/4 of a mile, or getting on a bus and driving 3/4 of a mile. Now, buses are better than individual cars, but that's, to me, is mobility.
Yep,
It
I agree.
stopped being
Yeah.
one person 90% of the time in a huge car and then picking their kids up for 5 minutes and then dropping them off and getting in this huge car again by themselves.
Specific back, picking up on that, two things about Waymo. And they were here before, by the way. They were retrofitting their vehicles in Detroit. They do that in Arizona now. But I see there being two things. First of all, I think that technology being present in our ecosystem is significant. And I think people seeing it is important. But I also am hopeful that it's going to solve some of, particularly in the city of Detroit, some of the transit problems we have. It's a micro-mobility solution. And it will connect places that we don't have. That's a big issue. But, the other thing I was at Michigan Central 2 nights ago for their wrap party, their annual. I got to tell you, standing there and seeing, 200 startup companies and down there now, that's the future.
Yeah.
You're going to hear more about that.
Let's talk more about it. But first, we're going to take a quick commercial break to our great sponsor, Alex Partners.
We act, we grow, we transform, we protect, we rescue. In moments that define the future, we are the partner you can trust. Alex Partners, when it really matters.
All right, we're back talking about how this American auto industry's got to get back on the offensive, stop all this retreating that it's been doing around the world and from different market segments. But Glenn, just before the break, you were hitting on what I think is going to be the North Star for where we've got to head to, all the startups that are happening here right now. And I want to hear you talk about that. But first, just as an anecdote, right in this immediate, so yesterday I was doing an interview with a company, I won't say who just yet, talking about an automation breakthrough that they're working on with a Japanese company that will be out by the end of next year. Right down the road here in our industrial park is a startup, handful of guys that have developed a software-defined EV battery. They came knocking on the door here going, hey, can you help us? I put them in touch with the U of M battery lab.
They knocked on the right door.
Happen there, right. There's another company down the road here that is working on carbon capture for locomotives. And what I'm getting at is this is all sort of fallen into my lap by accident, that I ran into these people in these companies. And I'm going, oh my God, this is really cool stuff. This is bleeding edge. And if I know these three, how many more out there are there that are working on all this stuff? And so, but you pick up the ball because you're working with 200 startups.
I'll give you a few, but I'm going to let him riff because this is his world. So look at the history, 120 years old. This town was built on startups, right? We all know that. It's culture, it's DNA. The U.S. Patent Office put its 4th patent office here about 15, 20 years ago because of the technology and the patent generation that comes out of the big companies. Now what we're doing is we're seeing this growth and investment and innovation. And Bill Ford saw it. That was his vision for the train station. Detroit will soon have 5 innovation districts across auto, mobility, clean energy, and life sciences. 5. Didn't even have but 1 not that long ago. Tying that to Ann Arbor, tying that to Macomb, Oakland, and then into Ontario. The game changer for us is going to be enabling new technologies. And I maintain there are people, men and women, who work for the incumbents, who have ideas, who will bring these things to life. That's who's filling these garages around you. And there are people who will come here if they know the funding's here, the policy's right, and the talent's here. Over to you.
So
we talk about this all the time.
So my day job is running the consultancy, but I also moonlight as helping startups as a mentor, advisor to some funds on due diligence for investments. And so I get to know, I work out a New Lab a couple days a week. I get to know all those founders pretty well. I'm excited.
And New Lab, again, for the audience that don't know, we're talking all this inside Detroit terminology. New Lab was
an innovation space right next door to Michigan Central.
Right.
So New Lab is an innovation company that Ford via Michigan Central hired to manage
Right.
this
Brooklyn.
innovation
Right.
space.
Right.
And the space now has around 120, 130 founders and startups working out of there. And its particular specialty is hard tech. So they have around $12 million, $15 million worth of capital equipment, CNC machines, 3D printers, you name it, they have it to build prototypes. And, one of the big things, and to Glenn's point, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. The automotive industry historically has been so good to the United States or to Michigan in the last 50 years that the idea of taking risk and starting a startup is kind of gone away. And the whole failure thing is still looked down upon. Whereas in Silicon Valley and in China, it's a badge of honor. And so I think getting back to that, and what we're likely going to see is a lot of layoffs forcing people to become entrepreneurs.
We're already seeing it.
Yeah. And so if we can encourage that, and again, write small checks, because the reality is, if you're a hard tech, you don't get a ton of investment of the entire pie, because most investors think software, which gives a quicker return. The hard tech companies need larger checks and a longer timeline. And so we specialize that in Michigan and the Midwest, but the money is concentrated amongst the few, whereas out in on the coast in Silicon Valley and in Boston and New York, there's more entrepreneurs and smart entrepreneurs than investors that want to invest in them. And so there's more demand and on the entrepreneur side as opposed to here. But these are things that we should still encourage.
So how do you change that then? I mean, success breeds success, right? You show some success stories to investors, they're going to go, where's more?
Yeah.
It's building. But again, you have to put the fundamental things in place. You need transit. Like, we need transit between Ann Arbor and Detroit. Imagine if we had a train that was going back and forth regularly. Imagine if we had a train that connected Detroit to Grand Rapids or Detroit to Chicago. We need policy. We need to invest in the R&D tax credit, but we need to make it a place where founders are welcome, and we need funders to be able to be here funding and that flowing too. So it's building that ecosystem, but really what it is, it's changing the economy. Look, I would love for there to be 3 more assembly plants in Michigan, but let's not kid ourselves. That's not going to happen. I hope there's some reshoring. We're seeing a little bit of it. It's too early because there hasn't been consistent trade policy, but let's assume we're going to get some more manufacturing, but it's not going to move the needle for this region and this economy. But new innovation and funding that new innovation across different sectors, that's where we've got to change. And that's where the conversation is actually on economic development right now too.
I'll give you a specific example really quickly, Gary. There's a company, DMS, who just
It's a great example.
Acquisition. Now they're called Voltava. It's the second largest minority-owned supplier
It's
in
Detroit
Michigan.
Manufacturing System.
Yeah, it used to be DMS. So they have a division called Kinetic that's trying to help stand up startups by building prototypes, getting them towards mass production and job one. So we need more suppliers to be entrepreneurial, to take on some risk, because and this is the challenging thing, at a time where they probably need to be holding on to all the capital they can because of all this uncertainty. But that's where those small suppliers who were entrepreneurs, small-time entrepreneurs back in the day, probably need to think back and say, who gave me my opportunities or who helped me? I need to pay that forward. I think if we can get more and more people on board to do that, that's when, and obviously you can tell this is where I'm really passionate about, and is one of the biggest reasons I moved back to Michigan, was because I was kind of drinking the Kool-Aid and like, I want to be a difference maker. And so I get a lot of joy out of being part of this ecosystem and trying to help here and there. So,
Well, so this sort of goes to what the three of you have been talking about, and I want to get some reflection on this. So in your report, you're looking at jobs, positions that are going to be available in 2032, which is not that far from now. So you have software developers, 3,360 annual openings a year. You've got industrial engineers, 1,785 per year. Mechanical engineers, 2,075 per year. And the least of all of the ones that you have on your list are industrial machinery mechanics, 2,000 per year. So it sounds to me that what you're doing is you're talking to guys who are innovative, who are engineers, whether they're mechanical engineers or software developers involved in that. And you talked about the education system. How many mechanical engineers are being put out in China on an annual basis? I mean, it's just like a frightening number, right? So how do we get those people to come to Michigan and not to stay in Silicon Valley where you were and say, auto industry, that's 19th century. We don't need that.
Again, he can talk to it because he lived in that ecosystem, that rainforest. The mechanical and electrical engineers that we're generating, we do it as well as anybody in the world. They're feeding the beast we have. They really are. And that's why companies, Rivian came here to get the company off the ground because of that talent, right? Now, what's all the news about Rivian right now? It's AI, it's automation, it's machine learning. That competency is not something we're known for.
They didn't do that in Plymouth.
They did not. And we generate a lot of those people here. Michigan Tech, but we lose them, right? Because the ecosystem, and I know it sounds like it is an overused word, but I used it. We don't have what Silicon Valley and Austin and Boston and Research Triangle, multiple industries where people move around, right? They move around between industries. They hop around and you have this buzz that's going on. Then you have the founder community, and that's what makes those go. That's what we have to build here. I think the most overused expression that I always hate is we need to diversify away from the automotive industry. We need to use the auto industry as a platform for diversification and help new companies grow.
That's a huge opportunity.
Exactly.
Huge opportunity, because if you believe that car manufacturing is going to be like the low margin part, it's going to be additive. When you're in a Waymo, what are you going to do for an hour? What are you going to do for 20 minutes? You're going to entertain yourself. You're going to shop. You're going to do that. These are opportunities within the vehicle that new companies or existing companies that want to go work with a GM, want to go work with a Ford, can open a little office to do, right? And then, to Glenn's point, so I spent 7 years in Silicon Valley, and it was just a mind-blowing experience. And I wasn't an Apple. I mean, I wasn't an employee of Apple. I was an employee of Silicon Valley, to your point, because they just go to different companies and they work. And, my thesis is, having lived abroad for so long, U.S. innovation is really good, but China has speed and they have numbers. So it's 4 times as many people. So we need to continue to bring in the Japanese companies, the Korean companies, the British companies, the German companies, to really round out our competition, our competitiveness to the rest of the world. It's difficult right now in this moment because the current administration is kind of poking some of our allies in the eye a little bit, but we need to all work together, because and that's where all the opportunity is, to me. That's
where the growth is. Quick story. I went to Silicon Valley 10 years ago with my MichAuto brochure, and I talked to Apple, Tesla, Google, and this little company that became Cruise. I sat in Kyle Vogt's kitchen in the warehouse district before GM bought them, and I said, well, what do you think about Detroit and Michigan? And they said, and it was just him, you guys are great metal benders. You bend the metal, we'll do the brains and the innovation. We have to do both here, and that has not changed. And now when you look at what's happening, again, all these forces around us, and the ability for us to foster startups, that's the future for us. If we don't do it, we can't force our way through the inflection point.
I think you both are hitting on something important. I don't think the legacies are going to do this at all. I don't think they're capable of doing it. It's going to take new startups working in the industry, or the mobility industry, let's call it, that are going to bring this region and this industry back to...
That was Bill Ford's vision.
Yeah.
For Michigan Central, and then the book depository become a new lab.
Right.
And they're doing it, and they've spent a lot of money doing it, and it's working.
No, I agree, but they're doing it outside of the Ford Motor Company. Look, Ford's putting all of its investment in future EVs in its skunkwork operations. It recognized it couldn't I'm not going to say you couldn't do it here, but it couldn't do it within the confines of the Ford
Agreed.
Motor Company. And I think GM's running into the same problem. I think Stellantis has already ran into that problem.
So what does that say about the industry in Detroit?
What it says is we need these startups. We need, look, if you go back to from about 1900 to around 1930, Detroit was the Silicon Valley of the world.
Right.
This is where the entrepreneurs were. This is where the innovation came out. We haven't lost that completely, but they're kind of smoldering embers right now. We need to get the flames going.
I don't know the exact history, but I know that there were dozens of brands, and the competition created the innovation. And so with 3 big OEM conglomerates here, it's hard to get any breathing room. But if 1 or 2 start to gain steam, if you're a startup, and really, really push the OEMs, number one, the OEMs are going to be better off. Number two, it makes that startup, if they can survive, stronger. Okay. And it makes it a global company as opposed to a Michigan company or a US company. Because the reality is, if John started a startup, a software development startup, or any kind of startup, he would still have to go to Silicon Valley to get the big check. But if he felt some loyalty or there was some true opportunity in the state of Michigan, maybe he would stay, right? Because anything that deals with AI or software, you're either going to go to Pittsburgh or you're going to go to Boston or you're going to go to Silicon Valley, right?
Isn't
And that's
ironic
okay.
Isn't it ironic that you said, Pittsburgh as a place for AI when we've historically known Pittsburgh for steel?
Yeah,
right?
no. That's a great point.
Hey,
and
it
it's
all came out of Carnegie Mellon.
exactly
That's
right.
where it came out of.
Exactly.
And I'm a
right.
Carnegie Mellon grad, so I had
Oh,
to
that's right, I
get my
forgot.
stuff out. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, 2007 was the DARPA challenge, and all those guys were grad students. So like Sterling Anderson was part of a team, I think, and then
Chris
Urson was also part of a team, and then Sebastian Thrun, who actually started the Waymo.
Yep.
So that's the thing. We can go to Pittsburgh and try to get them to come here, right? Like, to me, it's like there's a lot of ingrown innovation happening, but we should also welcome, because the innovators here, they need to be battle tested too. And that's not going to happen if it's only Michigan companies.
Well, okay, I want to, you brought up Rivian, and so, okay, if we look at Rivian, I mean, they did a lot of their engineering development literally down the street.
I saw the first prototype in their office. I'm sure you saw it too.
Yeah.
And so what did they basically do was they said, okay, we're gonna move to California, but we'll keep our facility in suburban Detroit, but it's much less important than it was. Its factory, Normal, Illinois, right?
The old Diamond Store Motors.
It was available.
I used to call on it.
It was available.
Date
It was
myself.
easy. But where are they going to build their second plant? Not in Michigan, Georgia. So
Is that still?
well, if
Like-
they
Yeah.
build, okay, if they
ever
build their
goes
second
through,
plant, it
they
will
got
be
the
in
land.
Georgia. And
They got the land.
and they got the money from the state. Okay,
But again, they're not going to come here because of the union. I mean, it's that I hate to put it.
No, they're
it's
not.
that simple.
That's a fact, and we could go down that. I do think, I will make the comment, I do think that, look, the UAWs are partners. They help build this state, and they are the partners, and there are contracts and there are agreements, and they are the lifeblood of those manufacturing plants. They got to be part of this. They have to be part of this. I know that's a difficult thing at times, particularly when the contracts come up. They have to be part of this. They have to be aware of it.
Agreed. Totally. It's the reality.
It is. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
We don't want them to go anywhere, but they got to be partners. They got to understand.
The key is, how do you take a UAW plant and make it competitive with the Chinese?
I wouldn't be who I am. My family wouldn't be who we are without the UAW, because
Exactly.
my dad got the union job, and that really helped kind of create.
It's going to become more
I worked my
advanced.
way through college as a UAW worker.
okay, but do the people who are in the startup world, these the 200 companies that Glenn mentioned, I mean, are they cognizant of the UAW, or is that something completely foreign?
They're not
to them?
even thinking about manufacturing. That's kind of
Not yet.
That's kind of like
A couple of them are, that
yeah.
we know.
That's kind of like an afterthought for them for now.
Mhm.
Because they're putting out fires every day, trying to keep the doors open, trying to find their first dollar of revenue, their second dollar, their third customer, their fourth customer, and that's why we should not poo-poo failure. We should encourage it, as long as they're working really hard because it creates this urgency, number one. Number two, it creates an excitement because now young people are looking at Detroit like, what's going on over there? It's not just building cars anymore. And the city of Detroit is just having such a resurgence because of the Lions and the Pistons and stuff like that. So more people are just looking at Detroit in general outside of Michigan and the United States. And this is a tremendous opportunity to Glenn's point, because there's a new governor, because of the midterms. And so if we can get everybody on board, and this is where I'll poo-poo it a little bit. There's a lot of performative things going on, like people wanting to take pictures with entrepreneurs and try to get some of that shine. But we have to continue to identify who those people that want to do the hard things and help these entrepreneurs,
So should the state underwrite the people who are
The
doing the
state
development?
absolutely has to invest in innovation, and it has done it incrementally. But you know who's doing it? Ohio. Been doing it for 20 years. Their innovation funding is 100 times what we are. Ohio. So the state absolutely has to take an active role in funding innovation. There was some in the last budget. It's been under fire. Again, flip-flopping back and forth. No, you have to create an ecosystem and an environment, and you can help that with funds. But it really does come to the private sector too. Need Chris Thomas and Jessica Robinson at
Yeah.
Assembly Ventures. We need more Assembly Ventures here.
Riley Brennan.
Yeah, we need more of them here.
They created Tubor,
Mhm.
So basically every year you invest a little bit of money in a Michigan-based company. And to your point, Glenn, I was in Texas for South by Southwest Austin earlier this year. And one of the startups was like, oh yeah, we were just in a meeting with the governor's office, and he said that they have $46 billion to make it rain for us to do business here. And so it's not just about the money, though. It's about the skills, and it's this whole menu of items, because if it's just about money, then everybody's going to go to the...
Well, and that's the other thing about this. If we put a policy together that depends on government handouts,
No.
it's not going to work. We need policy,
Exactly.
not handouts,
but
not subsidies.
Agreed. But we also need government to take an active role. I get the privilege to talk to a lot of CEOs on a regular basis like you do. And I was talking to one a week ago, and you know what he wanted to talk about? Affordable housing, not just in Michigan, where he operates all of his plants. And, it sounds like a broken record. No, it's a huge problem.
Right.
So Michigan has to address those issues. People live in places where there's strong schools, strong community, strong infrastructure, see broadband. That's why they live where they live. And then if you want the incumbents to grow, that's where they're going to grow. And that's why people are going to want to be here, particularly in the software area. And then if you want the founders to grow, you got to give them the things they want. Back to that railway line that goes back and forth to Ann Arbor and Detroit.
Mhm.
Got to make that happen.
Okay, but what about Ford and General Motors? Let's just use those two since they are
Mhm.
domestic companies. And they're going to say, "Oh, that's all fine and well to help these small startups and to do these various things, but we're competing with global Goliaths." Okay, we're fighting tooth and nail. We're having challenges, whether it's the challenges from Wall Street or the challenges from the market, or the challenges of environmental issues. You name it. We need help. We're getting black and blue, and they are.
Right.
They're not only getting black and blue, they're also a bit under assault by their own backyard. I mean, they've been under attack. There were tax credits given. They still are to be honored. They're very controversial right now. People want to peel them back, but they were given to the OEMs. Okay, we got to honor our commitments, but you also have to invest in what they need for the future. And frankly, flip-flopping back and forth on policy, our politicians have to understand this. I just went to Lansing in September, 8 o'clock briefing and a 4 o'clock briefing. Invited every legislator to come in, and I showed them the 5 forces, including China. And I showed them the 9,000 vehicle ships that BYD's got, 6 on the ocean right now and 2 being built. And we want them to know, because these are our hometown teams. We have to make sure we protect them and enable them and not make them feel like they're unwelcome. And then when we look forward, we got to make more companies feel like they're welcome, like Lucid, like Scout and Slate.
What do you think? I mean, how does a state, how does a country protect the development of new ideas as well as protect what has been a 120-year industry churning out vehicles and do both things? I mean, you said earlier about walking and chewing gum at the same time. Well, this is like walking, chewing gum, and juggling at the same time.
Rubbing your belly and tapping your head,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So it comes down to leadership and strategy. It comes down to leadership that understands the big picture. And now we start to put together a comprehensive strategy that, again, I would say isn't about government handouts and subsidies and things like that, but it's policy, that encourages the right kind of education, where we're training kids not just to go to college, because the reality is the vast majority are not going to college. The majority, though, can be trained in skills, especially, manufacturing skills. We have an acute shortage of skilled tradespeople. Those jobs pay really well, by the way. I mean, really well. So
And those are probably the protected ones from AI.
They are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
People say, well,
You can't offshore them. You can't outsource them. These are jobs that have got to be done, by human beings. But you need a leadership and policy to make this happen. And you need shows like this with people sitting around who deal with the leaders in the industry and in government to get the viewership talking about it to their peers and to their leaders. This is how it all starts.
Yes.
First, you got to start identifying the problem and then start talking about solutions.
If you want a strong, healthy future in the state you live in, I know your audience is wide.
Global.
It's global. But, you look at just the belt that goes down to the south. What if Kentucky and South Carolina and Alabama and Tennessee, they've had very consistent policy, even across different governors. That's a fact. I've been in all of them. I worked with all of them. Governor Snyder got it here. I will give Governor Whitmer credit. She's understood this and believed in it, wanted to make a difference. But they're past now, and she leaves office. So we got a huge decision about, because you're right, the first word you used was leadership.
That's where it all starts. And, we're talking about Detroit, and I mentioned our audience is global. For all you viewers in South Korea and Germany and England and every other car producing country, same issues, same
It really
issues.
is. Yeah, they are.
We're talking about Detroit. We all live here. Our families are here. Our friends are here. This is our community. We want to see it done. But it's not just relegated to Detroit.
No, as I said, that CEO said it's housing everywhere. The issues are the same, but where places that are growing, they provide the things we're talking about today.
And I feel the United States is much better positioned than some of those other countries that you had mentioned because of structural issues, because of a lack of culture of technology or technology companies. We have that. So we have the experience across a ton of different types of employees, and if we can convince them, because it's a better life to live in Michigan as a software developer or whatever, right? Like maybe that's not impossible, but
I don't think it's impossible.
but
No, it's entirely possible.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
There's nothing that can't be done once you imagine it. Literally. I mean, so we start to have...
Thank you, Henry Ford.
Yeah. So all we got to do is start the imagination, and I think we've done this on this show, but it's probably time to wrap it up. So to Lee, Glenn Stevens, awesome to have you guys on the show.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having
And
us.
good luck.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and yeah.
My job, what I get up every morning to do. That's what I think about.
Right. And Gary, let's congratulate ourselves on a year's worth of Autoline After Hours. This is the last show of 2025, but we'll be back again in 26 and keep the ball rolling.
January 8th.
Yeah.
Happy holidays, fellas.
Happy holidays. Yeah.
So,
Happy New Year.
Appreciate your time, guys.
Thanks,
you.
everybody, for having tuned in.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Alex Partners. For more than 40 years, we have helped companies and their stakeholders around the world harness opportunity, overcome challenges, and achieve outsized outcomes. Alex Partners, when it really matters.